Hello once again. Welcome to Dynamic Operations Custom Calculations Deep Dive. My name is Roger Gishuhi and I'll be your host. I'll be joined by Eric Yamaoka, our Director of Product, who will be leading the session. Dynamic Operations for Calculation is a powerful feature that allows you to run calculations for question responses. You can write JavaScript to run calculations such as setting question date to today's date, numerical calculations, pre-populating text, among many others. Erin will be sharing a few. Before we start, we're going to do a quick poll. Okay, so the poll is, what level of experience do you have with the TaroWorks feature, dynamic operations? As you fill in the poll, I'm going to go through a few housekeeping rules. Everyone is on mute by default, but please feel free to send questions via the chat or raise your hand, and I can unmute you to ask your question. These sessions are specifically for our customers and partners, so we want everyone to feel free to ask your questions and take advantage of this first time with our services team. We have about a 30-minute presentation, which will be followed by a Q&A session. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel at a future date. As Erin is going through the presentation, don't feel like you need to take screenshots or furiously take notes. There's a quick reference handout we created for this session, and you also have our customer support site as references. Okay, let's see, has everyone voted? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And these are the results. So we have the majority guys who have commonly used dynamic operations in TaroWorks form, so that's good. But also we have guys who have never used, and some also who don't know what dynamic operations is. So and some use it very minimally. So Erin is going to take us through the session, and she'll try attend to the needs of everyone. And if anything is not clear and you have questions, just throw them on the chat, and we'll have a Q&A after. So I'll hand over to Erin.
Okay, great. Roger, can you see my screen?
Yes, Erin.
Okay,
Thanks.
excellent. So hi everyone, I'm Erin. Thanks for joining. I lead product and professional services at TaroWorks, and today we're going to talk about our feature called dynamic operations. There are two types of dynamic operations. There are calculations and validations. We already had a session on validations, so this session is on calculations. And if you haven't seen the recording of that on our YouTube channel, I highly recommend it. Our teammate Billy Cohen was leading that. So our agenda today is going to be similar. We're going to start off, since some people are not even sure what this feature really is, and thank you for being honest and clear about that, so we can make sure we're all on the same page. We're going to talk about the feature and the difference between the two types, why this feature is important, how it's useful. I'm going to show you a demo of the mobile experience of a TaroWorks job that's been configured using dynamic operations calculations. We will take a break actually in between 3 and 4 and go over a little bit of what Billy covered last time, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And then we'll actually walk through the form that created the mobile user experience. We will be going through the actual JavaScript that is controlling the different question responses. And like Roger said, please feel free to jump in if you have any questions as we're going through. After we've been through the entire form, we'll review some of the new functions we learned today. And then we'll talk a little bit about our support processes and the resources you have available to you going forward. If you see anything that's not included on this agenda that you'd like us to cover, just go ahead and throw it in the chat and Roger will raise it. Okay, so what is dynamic operations? Dynamic operations is a feature that allows you to write custom JavaScript to be included on any question in your TaroWorks form. And there are two types of JavaScript that you can write. One is a validation, which will, as it's called, validate the response that the mobile user has entered into the question. The other is a calculation, which is what we're focused on today, and that pre-populates the response to a question. So the difference is the action that actually takes place as a result of a validation culminates in an error message. So the mobile user is going to enter a response to a question. If that response doesn't meet whatever business rule is represented there, you can throw a custom error message that prevents the mobile user from proceeding to the next page. For calculations, the action is that the answer to the question is automatically written into the form. Either type can use responses from previously displayed questions. So you can use the inputs of the mobile user or inputs maybe that have been pulled in from the drill down hierarchy for your calculations or your validations. For validations, the question response is editable. The mobile user is the one entering the response in the first place, so you can continue to change that if you run into error messages. And for calculations, it is not. So when you're asking TaroWorks to come up with the response to a question, that is going to be written into the form. The mobile user will be able to see it. They will not be able to change it. And finally, when these code snippets run is going to be different between a validation and a calculation. For a validation, the code will be run when the user tries to leave the page. So whether you have one question in a page or 10 questions in a page, your validations will run when the mobile user hits next. For calculation, it's just the opposite. So the code will run as the page is being initially loaded, showing you all the responses to the questions that have been calculated via dynamic operations. If there's any questions about any of that, feel free to throw them in the chat or raise your hand. So why is this important? Specifically for calculations, if you envision yourself as the TaroWorks mobile user, the woman in the center, you might be interviewing someone, whether it be a customer or a beneficiary, or generally just in the field collecting lots of information. And it's extremely time saving to be able to, in an offline fashion, have some things automatically calculated for you, whether they actually be mathematical calculations or maybe just running the inputs that you're collecting through a lot of business rules to get you to a conclusion. One example of which would be, qualifying someone for maybe a program or a benefit. It just makes the TaroWorks mobile users' life easier to get their job done. And of course, in that second leg, once that data is synced into Salesforce, that will make that data more accurate. Anytime you can remove any kind of manual human processing, when you have a consistent business rule you can apply to a form, then that makes your data more accurate. And the data that you're sharing with the rest of your organization more useful. So today we're going to be working with a sales scenario. If anyone has ever joined one of our webinars previously, we're typically giving examples around our make-believe customer Aquacomb. This TaroWorks customer builds wells and they sell water filters, and also in this scenario other water filtration products, and then they monitor the health progress of the community. So the form that's been configured today is to record a filter sale. So we're going to be giving the mobile user, or excuse me, the well site member the option to purchase some products. So as I start the job, I'm first going to select who's the well site member that I'm selling to. And let's say that Mary is buying some of our products today. And then I can choose the price book based on the scenario, or maybe in other scenarios, we'd only even expose one price book to our mobile user. And then I'm choosing which products Mary's interested in. Let's say she's interested in buying something of everything today. So through this scenario, we're going to figure out how much or enter how many of the different products Mary wants to buy. We're going to see if she qualifies for some financing. We're going to see if she's interested in getting any of these products installed. And then we'll also see how much her total order is going to cost her. So starting from the beginning, you could see that this well site member value was pre-populated, but this is actually a value coming in from the drill-down hierarchy. So dynamic operations is not involved here. In the second question, you can see this order type is pre-populated and I can't edit it. So this is dynamic operations calculation at work here, hard coding the single select value to be sales order. I have the option of displaying or not displaying these questions as well. So if it's useful to the mobile user, I can display it. As you'll see when we move to the form, there are also some other questions being hard-coded here that are not displayed because they might not be useful to the mobile user, and therefore we just shouldn't clutter up their user experience. The next question is the date of the order. You can see it's hard-coded to today. If I logged in tomorrow, it would also dynamically be February 20th instead of February 19th. Also a calculation. On the expected delivery date, we can enter based on when Mary wants us to come back with these products. And then we can also scan to get a barcode. If Mary has a coupon available to her that she'd like to use on her order, can do that. And her coupon she had was to save 20%. In the next table, this is data being pulled in from the drill down hierarchy. So if you recall, we selected some products out of the price book. So what these are coming in from the drill down. I'm going to ask her how many she wants of each product. Enter those quantities. And then in the next section, we're going to be finding out from Mary if she wants us to install any of these products for her. Of the 5 products that she selected, not all of them actually may require installation. The filters, we can just hand to her and she can use them, but the systems that she selected actually could require some installation work. So of the 5, there are 2 that she's chosen that require the installation, which is a calculation. This is just using some skip logic, letting the mobile user know, giving them some content to say what the next table is for. So of the following products require installation. If she wants us to quote her on how much it would cost to install these for her, she can choose how many she would like included in that quote. So let's say she'd like us to help her with everything. And sorry, just another comment about that table. So the way that these values were populated, the product name and the quantity ordered, was by creating a subset of the previous table that we'd already seen of the total, all the products that she's ordering. So we'll see how that's being generated through a calculation as well. Okay, so we can ask whether or not she's interested in some financial support, and we're just going to ask a few simplified questions to help find that out. So this would probably be much more involved in a real use case, but just to give an example of using business logic in a calculation in order to determine an outcome. So let's see her household income, number of adults, and number of children. So based on those 3 inputs, some logic's going to run in the background and say, is she eligible for the loan or not? And we'll see the underworkings of what that logic is. You can do this in a bunch of different ways. We could have actually exposed that logic through content to the mobile user if that's useful. Maybe sometimes it's not. I think sometimes shielding a lot of how all those business rules run from the mobile user kind of helps them from being tempted to kind of game the system or have to even think through what those how those business rules are interacting with the outcome. Okay, so she's eligible. Again, this is just using skip logic to describe, give the mobile user a bit of content to help script with the well site member, and just let them know because of their inputs, a loan officer will be reaching out to them to take the next steps in the financing process. And then finally, we have the order summary. So we have the subtotal, which is just running across our product table and multiplying the unit price by the quantity ordered. and then summing all of those together. So her subtotal was 50,000 shillings, but she did scan in a coupon for 20% off. So what we'll actually be collecting when we come back is 40,000 shillings. Okay, so that's the mobile user experience. Before we now go and look at the actual dynamic operations in Salesforce on the form, let's revisit a few of the concepts that Billy covered last week, especially for some of you who aren't familiar with the feature at all. So again, I highly encourage you to watch the recording of Billy's session 2. Last time he covered the comparison operators and the logical operators, which is really useful for validations because you're doing a lot of comparisons between things to see whether or not the mobile user's input's broken any rules. I've added some numeric operators, which are pretty obvious. They're just mathematical operators, as you would expect. And the functions that Billy covered last time, we're going to be reusing a few of these. So the first one is a value function. This is the way that we refer to any response in a question. So for either validations or calculations, you can use the responses to previously displayed questions as inputs to whatever calculation or validation you're running. In order to do that, it's always going to have the syntax starting with TW for TaroWorks, dot the section name, dot the question name, dot the word value. And that value function is how you are referring to the response to the question. The next one is length. So if you're using the length function on a string, which would be a set of letters, it will tell you how many characters are, or sorry, it could be letters or numbers, but the length will tell you how many characters are present. If you use it in the context of a repeat section, which is what we're going to do today, it'll tell you effectively the length of the array, which is how many times the repeat section has been repeated. The third one we're going to use today that was also used last time is this new date function, which is going to return today's date. And the last two we're not going to reuse today, but I just wanted a reminder of what they were. The is NaN is going to check whether or not a response is a number, and the last one is going to check whether the question actually has an answer or whether it was skipped. Yep. Looks like, Roger, do we have any questions we need to stop for now, or should we keep going?
Let's keep going, and then I'll shoot you once they start coming in.
Okay. I think we have one question here. Just want to make sure it's not relevant to this page so that if it's a topic we're not going to cover later, we don't have to come back. Can a calculation evaluate the answer to a previous question on the same page if that previous question is dependent on user entry without having to reload the page? Great question. Unfortunately, no. If you're going to use any question response as an input to the question that you're writing the JavaScript on, it has to have been displayed on a previous page. Excellent question. Any other questions so far? All right, awesome. And Kevin, just let me know if I didn't answer that fully. All right. So now we're ready to move on to the form. If nobody else has any other questions. And this is our record filter sale form, which is actually structured for one of our new products, TaroWorks Enterprise. So in the beginning of this very first section, we have a bunch of ID fields. Those are all just coming from the drill down hierarchy. Typically when, you're welcome, Kevin. Typically when I'm setting up my forms, namely, especially for ID fields, if I have a lot of data that I'm pulling in out of Salesforce that I don't necessarily need the mobile user to see, I'll stack those all in a section in the beginning of my form and hide all of those. Hiding questions should, though, happen after you're done testing. Okay, so that's what accounts for probably the first 4 questions. Question 5 you actually saw in the mobile user experience. It was a well site member's name, and that was just for display purposes. And then we're getting to our very first dynamic operations calculation on the order type. So if you recall in the mobile experience, we saw that sales order was defaulted. The mobile user didn't have to enter it, saving them a click. We could even have hidden that as well. So in order to do that, you're going to check add dynamic operations using JavaScript. That's what makes this box display below. You're choosing between a calculation and a validation, which changes at what point the code is going to be run. Is it going to be run when this page is loaded, or is it going to be run when the mobile user tries to leave this page? And then what we want to do with this JavaScript is I want to take the response to this question, order type, and I want it to be set to the value sales order. So to do that for a single select question, or to refer to the response to any question, it's always tw.sectionName, which if I scroll up is create filter sale. So that's the section name, and then the question name is order type. As you can see here, we're always using the name field, never the caption. And then the value. So as we just covered, that function is going to refer to the response to the question. So I want to set the response to this question to be sales order. And when we're setting the value of a single select question, you're going to use the label, which would be in quotation marks because it's a string. With every statement you're making, you're going to always end those sentences with a semicolon. And as I believe I mentioned, or Billy mentioned in the last session, when you save a question after you've entered your JavaScript, all we're checking for is syntax. So if you've done something silly, maybe that doesn't make sense, as long as your syntax is correct, you're not going to see that until you get to the form. Also, for those of you that have, this is all completely new concept, you've never seen this before. I also had never, didn't know a line of JavaScript when I very first started with this feature. We have a tutorial article that is linked from this box in any section that has examples of scenarios where you can copy and paste the JavaScript and just change the names of the sections and the questions if you like. Okay, so that's how you hard code or set a response to a single select question using dynamic operations. The next one is exactly the same, but if you recall, you didn't see this question. So we're also setting the status of this order to be in a draft status. And it's the same exact syntax or format for setting the value. It's also a single select question. Only difference is I hid it, but it's going to operate in exactly the same way. It's just that I didn't feel the mobile user needed to see this response. Okay, expected, oops, I skipped over this one, date of order. So this is how you would set the value of a date field or a date question. Again, the syntax in the front is exactly the same, tw.sectionName.questionName.value. That's referring to the response to this question, date of order. And then we're going to use a function that we covered last time, which is new date, which will return today's date. So this is hard coding the date of the order to the date that the mobile user is filling out the question. Okay. For the next questions, they are all either pulled in from the drill down hierarchy or entered by the mobile user. So we scanned the coupon code with the mobile user. Questions 11 through 14 were all pulled in from the drill down hierarchy, including product family, which is something that was hidden, not something that was exposed to the mobile user. And then the mobile user entered the quantity that was ordered. So how many of each of these products did Mary want? And then the next screen we saw was of all the products that she'd selected out of the drill down hierarchy, how many of them actually require installation? So let's take a look at what this JavaScript will look like. And actually, before we dive in, let's talk about some new functions. So the first function we're going to talk about is called a for loop. And the top box is going to show you the syntax or how it's structured. So you'd type the word for, and then you'd have parentheses, and then you'd have open and close brackets that contain a bit of code. The very first statement it's basically accepting 3 parameters. There's 3 variables you can set. The first one is whatever you're writing there is going to be executed once before you ever start down into the code block to be executed. The second statement is the condition under which you're going to continue to execute the code block. And then the third one is what happens after each execution of the code block. So if we look at this example below, as long as this variable I, starting with I equals 0, so this is going to be executed before we start doing any of the code contained in the brackets. As long as the value of I is less than 5, then after each iteration of the for loop, we are going to increase I by 1. So effectively, this is going to loop through this code 4 times. Once for I equals 0, once for I equals 1, once for I equals 2, etc. And then every time, whatever code is contained within the for loop is going to be executed. So this is going to type out the number is 0, the number is 1, the number is 2 on different lines. The other function that Billy covered last time is an if statement. So this is very commonly used in validations. An if statement is going to check a condition. If the condition is true, then it will execute what happens inside the curly brackets. So in this example, if this variable hour is less than 18, then it will set the greeting to be equal to good day. Otherwise, it will not. Otherwise, it will do nothing. You can also add an else after this to be a catch-all for all the scenarios where that condition is not met. So we'll see that in a later example too. So those are the 2 functions that we're going to use in this example. And what we want to do, what we're trying to accomplish here, is that the products requiring installation are going to be products that have the product family UV filtration system. So we didn't see this in the user interface. We could have displayed it or not, but to keep the table clean, I hid it, but it doesn't mean we can't use it. So what I want to do is go through this table, and for each product that we pulled in, for each row that was in that table, I want to check to see if the product family was UV filtration system. If it was, I want to increase my count of how many products require installation. So that's what this code is going to do. So we're starting off by setting this count of the products that require installation to 0, because there may be she might have selected all filters, so there might not be any products in that list that require any installation at all. And then we're going to use our for loop. So before we start, this variable that we're creating is going to be set to 0, and we're going to want to iterate for as many times as that repeat section is long. So if I pulled in 15 products from the drill down hierarchy, I would want to loop through this 15 times. If I pulled in 2 products, I'd want to loop through it 2 times. And that's what the structure does. It's saying, starting with 0, I want you to increase this count with every iteration of the for loop until we've gone through all the products in that previous repeat section. Now each time for each row that's in that repeat section, we're going to check, is the product family value equal to UV filtration system? So to refer to a response to a previous question, the general structure is tw.sectionName.questionName.value. However, when you're dealing with the repeat section, you're going to see one piece that is different. If you're thinking about a repeat section, I'll try to look at it as like a table, the same way you would, we did looking at tabular format in TaroWorks. You can think of each row having like their own indice value. And it's always going to start with 0. So whatever the first product was, or the first row, that is going to represent the repeat section where I equals 0. The second one is going to be that iteration of the repeat section where I equals 1, and so on and so forth. So what we're doing here is using that I value to say, for the very first row in that repeat section, which you would do by these square brackets and then the indice of which row you want to look at. So let's start with the first one. And then for that first row, tell me what the product family value was. So question name that's in that repeat section and the value that was in that question. And with the if statement, we're checking, does that value equal UV filtration system? If it does, and only if it does, increase my count. So you could use count plus plus, and another way that might be easier to understand would be take the count value and the existing count value and increase it by 1. Either way works. So obviously, if it's not a UV filtration system, if the product family value was filter, then it's not going to come into this, come into the body of this if statement, and the count will not increase, and it'll move on to when the I equals 1. And it'll do I equals 2, I equals 3, and go through every row to check and count how many of those products have a UV filtration system value for product family. So now we have this, like that count is going to represent at this point when you're exiting the for loop, that count represents how many products are going to require installation. However, we still need to set that as a response to the question. So the question we're trying to populate is products requiring installation. And so we do tw dot section name dot question name dot value equals this variable that we've created in the beginning of our JavaScript. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Any questions about this so far? And if you haven't already, you can download the PDF of the handout that has all of these code snippets in it, so you can actually copy and paste them into your own sandbox and play with these on your own. Looks like someone might have a question, Roger.
No, but I mean, as we move along, is the JavaScript case sensitive? Is there a difference if you use smaller case or uppercase?
It is case sensitive. So for all of those functions, you'll need to copy and paste the way that they're listed exactly in the Zendesk article. Great question.
Okay. I see someone has their hand raised, Dennis. So maybe I'll unmute Dennis, then we can hear his question. Okay, Dennis. Dennis, are you there? Maybe you can.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Okay, hi. I wanted to inquire about how you're accessing the values. Is there a way, like in JavaScript, you can test whether you have the right value on the console? Can you do the same with this?
Like stepping through the code within Salesforce?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that what you're saying? I wish we do not have that yet. So unfortunately, as of now, and that's kind of why we encourage, especially new administrators, to highly leverage the support article, being able to copy, and we have a ton of use cases here that I think do cover a lot of what our customers are working with. We have both validations and calculations. So copying and pasting the code from here and then just updating the section names and the question names is the best way to not run into like syntax errors. But if you do have an issue on the mobile side, it will just tell you there's an issue with your JavaScript and you need to reevaluate. So definitely something that would improve this feature would be more enhanced debugging tools. Yeah, but today there's no way to step through the code. If you're really struggling using like a dummy question to dump outputs to kind of section out your code is the way that I usually debug. Great question.
Okay, thank you.
Did that answer the question? Do you have any other questions?
No, that was it. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks for asking.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. And for the rest, feel free to throw in your questions, and in the next break, we will attend to them. Thanks, Erin.
Okay, great. Next. Now we know how many products are going to require installation. So what we wanted to do now is create a whole new table to show to the mobile user, showing all the products that required installation, how many of them you were planning on ordering, so that they can use that information to tell us how many they want us to install. So we're going to actually use this value from question 16 in order to drive the number of repeats that are going to be in our next table. So if I look at how many times the request installation quote repeat section is going to repeat, it's based on the number of products that require installation. One thing to note is that if you're ever using the value that has been generated by dynamic operations calculation for scoring or for skip logic, or excuse me, for skip logic or for like driving repeat sections. So basically using it as a variable in the interface and not for another dynamic operations calculation or validation, it cannot be hidden. So that's one thing to note. Okay, so now we know that based on what the mobile user selected, we will have counted all of the products that are of type product family UV filtration system, and that's how many rows are going to be generated into this next table. But then how do we populate the columns in those rows with the appropriate values? So the first would be product name. I just want to pull in all the product names for the appropriate products from the first table. And this is going to use our for loop concept again, so we can go through every row in the very first table. But this one's slightly more complicated because we're actually building this second table at the same time, and they're not going to be the same size. So if we kind of take a pause and look at this Excel spreadsheet as a bit of an example, if we look at this as our source repeat section, so we have a list of products, by their names, how many the user said they wanted, the unit price, and then hidden we have the product family. We want to go through every one of these rows, and then I want to create a new repeat section, pulling in those values. So I need to keep track of two variables. One is what row am I on and when I'm doing my checking and my pulling, and the other is what row am I on in this new repeat section that I'm building. So we're using I and J. So this is J equals 0 is representing how many rows I have so far in my new section, which is none. And then I'm going to iterate through every row in my source section, which is we're going to be using I to represent where we're at there. And we're going to start with 0 and go through for as many rows as we had in that order quantities repeat section. So same exact for loop as we used before. And we're going to do the same exact if statement as well. We're checking for each row, pull out which ones have the product family UV filtration system. And the piece that's different is that if it does, then I actually want to set a particular column in the particular row in my new section to match one in the old section or in the previous section. So to set the value, I'm going to do tw dot the section name I'm currently in, which is request installation quote. And then I'm using my new variable because we want to start with 0. The first time we get a match, we're still on the very first row in our new section. So it will be 0. So I'm creating the first row, and I'm going to pull the product name from the product name in the corresponding quantity section. So notice anytime I'm talking about what row I'm in for the new section, I'm going to use J. And anytime I'm talking about what row I'm checking in the previous section, we're going to use I, because we're going to need to iterate through the previous section 5 times. And we're in, as you saw in the mobile experience, we're only building 2 rows in our new section. So every time we get a match and we've actually inserted a product name, we also need to increase that J value. So if I check the first row, it's a filtered, no match. So now I equals 2, check the second row, filter, no match, 3, same deal. Excuse me, I equals 2 is the same deal. Now when I get to I equals 3, this is a match, right? The product family is UV filtration system. So now I want to pull over those values, and then I need to increase my value for J. So what's the next one I would write if I got another match? J has to be increased by 1. So that's what we're doing here. So I'll go through it again. Second row, I'll get another match, and we'll say product equals, we'll pull the product, we'll pull the order quantity. J will be 1 then, and we'll insert it into that second row. And J will equal 2, but we're not going to get any more matches, so we're not actually going to write anything else. So this is the second table that we saw in the mobile user experience. Questions? So this is effectively how we're building like a subset in a new repeat section from the old repeat section.
Okay, we do have a question, maybe not on this directly. I think if anyone has a question on this directly, feel free to shoot. So we have a question from Kevin. Can you also reference static data like cascading select tables or the hierarchical drawdown and the dynamic operations calculations?
Definitely data passed in from the drill down hierarchy. So it would need to be pre-populated into a question and like passed into the form. Cascading select tables, let me get back to you on that. I don't think we have an example in our support article, and I don't think it's possible yet, actually, but I will confirm. Great question. That answer your question, Kevin? Just let us know if it didn't. Okay, cool. Okay, so moving on, the quantity order is exactly the same. It's just when we are, what we're writing when the condition is true is the quantity ordered, not the product name. So it's exactly the same as the previous one. We're just using a different question name. All right, moving on to loan eligibility. So we asked a few questions, and then what the business logic here is, the make-believe rule, is that if the average household income is less than average household income per well site member or per household member is less than 100,000 shillings, then you're eligible for assistance. Otherwise, you're not. So this is what the JavaScript would look like in this scenario. We're hard coding the response to a single select question that has more than one option this time, and we're using that else function that I mentioned. So the first piece is it's just math, the same as you would do those numerical operators that we looked at in the PowerPoint presentation. We are referring to the total annual household income, and then we are going to divide that value by the sum of the number of adults and the number of children in the household. So it's just an average calculation. And what we're doing is the result of that calculation, we're checking to see, is it less than 100,000? If it is, then we want the response to this question to be yes. Otherwise, and else would be a catch-all for all other conditions. So anytime that this is not true, this first if statement, anytime that that value is not less than 100,000, then this action is going to happen. And that would be setting the response to this question to be no. So combining one new concept, just this else statement. Any questions on that? Okay, getting to the last page in the mobile experience. We are calculating the subtotal. So this involves running across each row in the repeat section where we had the unit price and the quantity that was ordered. We're multiplying those together and then adding them up for every row. So we're starting with this, our same old for loop. We want to go through every row in the quantity ordered or order quantities repeat section. And what we're working with here is a running total. So I have a variable called subtotal. It's going to start with 0. And then for every row, I'm going to add whatever the subtotal value was previously. I'm going to add the quantity from that row in the repeat section, or the times the, the quantity ordered times the unit price. So we are dealing with the repeat section, so we need to specify which row we are actually pulling that field question value from, which we're using the variable I, and we're multiplying the price times the quantity. And that's going to go through, the for loop will have it go through every row and add those up. And then finally, that our calculation is done, but we need to actually set the response to this question to be that value. So we're using tw.sectionname.questionName.value equals this variable that we've calculated. Any questions on that? So a lot of these are using that same structure to iterate through the values of a repeat section. All right, next one is discount. So we're going to learn a new function here. So when I scanned the coupon code, what was associated with that QR code was a string that was save 20. So let's say in Aquacom in our business, when we distribute coupons, it might be some big long string, but the last 2 characters always represent the percentage off that the customer is supposed to be receiving from the off the order. So in order to pick off those last 2 characters, we're going to use a function called slice. It takes 2 inputs, a start and an end, and only the start is required. So the very first character would be at position 0, similarly to how we're treating the iterations of a repeat section. So if in this example, I had a string value and I used the slice function, if I was slicing just passing the value 3 in as the start value, then it would extract from position 3 to the end. So position 3 would be the 4th letter, so 0, 1, 2, 3. And so it would output the words LO and then world. A tip is that with this slice function, if you use a negative number, it'll start that count of the position from the end. So what we're going to do here is set the value of the response to this question to be negative, and that's just how I choose to present this value to the mobile user. I want it to say negative 20% because it's easier to understand. And then I'm going to slice, I'm going to take the response to the question, the QR code question. So the value that was populated there was save 20, the string save 20 altogether. And I'm slicing off the last 2 characters. And then I'm just adding a percentage sign just for ease of the mobile user's view. So to concatenate different strings, you can use a plus sign, which is also used for addition with numbers. And anytime you are referring to a character as a string, it should be in quotation marks. Any questions about that one? So I'm pre-populating the response to a text question by combining my own hard-coded text and pieces of a response from a previous question using the slice function. Okay, and then finally, we're going to introduce one last concept, and that is parse int. So this function basically converts a string to a number. And anytime you're doing operations where you're concatenating or you're adding or you're having two values work together in a statement, they need to be of the same type. So I can't add a number and a letter. I can't concatenate things that are not strings, etc. So the problem I have right now is that the response that comes in from the QR code is a string. It's not a number. So even when I peel off those last two digits, I know it's a number because it's our business, how our business is run, but the system sees them as letters. So what the parseInt function does is convert those letters into a type of number. So what I'm doing is taking that exact same code snippet I did in the previous example. I'm slicing off the last two characters, which are just characters to the system, 2 and 0. And then I'm using this parseInt function and passing that string of numbers into this parseInt, and that's converting it to a type of number. So now that it's a number, I can do mathematical operations on it, which I want to divide by 100 so that the discounts really point to 2 and not 20. And then I just want to take the subtotal and take out the discount. So you do that by multiplying by 1 minus the discount. Effectively, I'm multiplying the subtotal by 0.8. One thing to note, why am I redoing this up here? Why am I recalculating the subtotal when I have it as a response to a question here? For usability, I wanted all these to be displayed in the same page. And per Kevin's question earlier, I can only use as inputs to calculations the responses to questions that are displayed on previous pages. So my options were to display subtotal on a previous page, and then I could use that as an input by doing tw.sectionName.questionName, referring to the subtotal that was previously calculated. Or if I want this all to be displayed at the same time, I would just repeat that calculation here so that it can be used within the context of this dynamic operation calculation. Okay, that is the last example. Questions? So again, all of this code is available to you in the handout, so you can copy and paste those into your own forms if you want to start to play with these. Obviously, we have our own support article as well that has additional examples.
Great, thanks, Erin. So guys, keep the questions coming as I read the ones submitted so far. So question for you, Erin, can I write a dynamic operation calculation that is editable? An example for this, that one that has a default value and somebody can change from that default value to another value.
Yeah, great question. Not yet. It is a feature request that we have available to run a calculation that pre-populates the question and allows it to remain editable. But as of right now, it is not editable when you run a calculation.
Thanks, Erin. Okay, do we have any other questions? And feel free to raise your hand. I can unmute you.
While we're waiting for any final questions, I just want to quickly cover, if you do think of questions outside of the session, we actually have a new support form. If you go to our support site at TaroWorks.zendesk.com, on every article, there is a little link in the upper right-hand corner that says submit a request. This is how we're now accepting our support tickets or starting support tickets. Any type of troubleshooting you're having with the calculations or validations you're trying, or questions you might have about the support article, feel free to submit a request and we'll respond to you. Every customer gets 1 hour of free support a month, so definitely use that to your advantage. And just to clarify, we are not going to be getting into your org and writing this JavaScript for you, but we will help you debug. If you do need help with that, if you feel like you're short on bandwidth or generally just would like someone else to be authoring these for you, We do have ongoing consulting packages that come in batches of 5 hours or 10 hours a month for a 3-month period. And you can use that for us actually getting our hands in your org and either authoring dynamic operations for you or creating forms and jobs. It can also be used for training or advisory services. So just to let you know, if this was a little overwhelming for you and you really don't have the time at this point, but you want to benefit from the feature, that is an option available to you. You should reach out to your account manager. Another service we also have is a job audit. So if you feel like you can kind of follow the examples we talked about today, but you're not really sure how, from a business perspective, to use this feature in your use case, we can go through your TaroWorks jobs and try to identify improvements and basically give you a report on how you can improve the user experience and data quality of the jobs you're already using. So another option. Resources available. I've been showing the dynamic operations article on our Zendesk site. Definitely use that. And then something I cited throughout the presentation was this website called W3 Schools that Billy also referenced last time. It's a great resource for getting started with JavaScript. All right. Did any other questions pop up?
No, looks like we're good. There's a question from Pablo. So let me unmute Pablo so that you can go ahead and ask the question.
Okay.
Pablo, you can unmute and then you can.
Hi, everyone. I have a case when in a multiple select question, I would like to default an answer, but I don't know if it's already possible because I asked a while ago and it was not ready yet. This function.
So you want to hard code the response to a multi-select question?
Yeah.
Okay, I believe that is actually possible. Give me just a moment. Let me see if I can't come up with a quick example before we send you guys off here. So I'll paste it in the chat and maybe I can actually add it to the handout because I don't think this example has made it to our support site yet. Let me paste this into the chat and I'll throw it on to the, you know what, that's probably not going to come out very nice. Let me just throw it into the PowerPoint presentation real quick. Might be a little easier to look at. Okay, I'm just going to put it here. Let me know. So just so you can kind of see the context, so I have something to speak to. But if you did want to use the values in your multi-select question, it's kind of similar. A single question and all of its responses are kind of similar to how you would treat an array or a repeat section. So this is the normal syntax of affecting the response of a value in a multi-select question. I guess that's really accessing. It's probably to use it for as an input to another calculation. And what you want to do is set the value of the multi-select question, right?
Right.
Okay.
This was also one of my questions. If I can get access to the answers in a multi-select question.
So access is possible. Let me get back to you on setting the value. I believe this is possible. So for both your question and Kevin's question, if it's possible, we'll get it added to our support site next week.
Great. Thank you.
Excellent question. No problem.
Thanks, Pablo. Any other last minute questions? I think we're at time.
All right, thanks everyone for joining. You'll receive a survey after this webinar for ideas on what you would like to see as a topic next. So please give us some feedback so we can make these productive for you guys.
Yeah, and thank you, Erin, for a great presentation. Thanks, guys. Have a lovely day.
Sorry we ran long. Bye.